や、サトル。久しいね。
偽物？いや、本物。
You just saw it. The strongest sorcerer alive freezes. Not because of a technique, not because of a curse, because he saw the face of one person who ever truly knew him. That moment tells you everything about Gojo, not about his powers, about his loneliness. And that loneliness is what makes his death hurt differently, and why JJK fan never recovered from it. So let me start this video by telling you a small story how I basically get spoiled about Gojo's death. In summer 2023, while the Hidden Inventory arc was airing, and one of the following days when I was eating with my cousin, I just watched Gojo got cut down by Toji and I was completely hyped about it. And when I asked if she was watching JJK, she disappointedly and said, "Too many characters are dying in this show." And I laughed and thought she was talking about Toji. So I told her with a complete confidence, "Don't worry, Gojo will come back." And we weren't talking about the same death. Because the real question isn't why Gojo died, it's what his death's supposed to leave behind and whether JJK made us feel it or not. If you are still upset about Gojo's death, yeah, same here. That never really went away for a lot of us. It's very hard to say Gojo was just a powerful character in JJK. He was the character on which JJK's whole world was built around. Every threat was measured against him, every funny moment existed because he was somewhere in the background holding it all together. So when he died, for me the question wasn't who can beat Sukuna. It was what does this world even look like without Satoru Gojo? And I was not the only one. The fandom felt it immediately. Its Gojo over meme wasn't just a joke. It was a collective grief. The fandom trying to process how the story could just end its most important character. But to understand why Gojo's death hit so hard, you have to understand what Gojo was holding all together in the story. Gojo's death didn't break JJK just because fans were sad. It broke something because the world after him never felt ready to carry his weight. Think of a house. Gojo wasn't just a character in the story of Jujutsu Kaisen, he was the pillar holding the weight of the story up. Satoru Gojo did 3 jobs at once. He maintained peace just from his presence alone, he kept his students safe, and he was also the mediator between the higher-ups and Jujutsu society. And if he hadn't been there, Yuta would have faced execution back in JJK 0. Something similar would have happened to Yuji and Maki if Gojo wouldn't have intervened. And once Gojo was sealed, the higher-ups moved against Yaga, so when Gojo disappeared, the cost was immediately, look, you can remove a pillar from the building, but only if the rest of the structure can hold the weight. And that's created a strange contradiction with Satoru Gojo. Gojo says he wants the next generation that can surpass him. He talks about raising the next generation, but when the world faces the biggest threat, he stands alone. So what did Gojo actually wants? And I'll come back to this. Look, I haven't read every single chapter of the manga, but Gojo's death was so massive it transcended the medium. It wasn't just a spoiler, it was an earthquake across the community. And as a JJK fan, I don't think I truly recovered from it. And the reason was simply deep down, I always expected him to come back. To answer what Gojo actually wanted, we have to go back to the person who knew him before he became the strongest. You can't explain Gojo without Geto, and you can't explain Geto without Gojo. Geto knew Gojo before the title swallowed everything else. He was one of the few people who saw Satoru not just the strongest. But we all know after Toji and after Riko's death, they diverged. They both saw the same exact broken world. Geto saw the corruption and he chose destruction. Gojo saw the corruption and he chose hope. He chose to raise his students. That choice didn't fix everything, but it matters. Which brings us to the most quoted line from the JJK. Geto asked Gojo, "Are you the strongest because you are Satoru Gojo, or you are Satoru Gojo because you are the strongest?" The first time I heard this line, I replayed it like 5 times just because it sounded so deep and so cool. And it does have some deep meaning. At first, it sounds like a question about strength. It isn't. It's a question about the identity. If you take away Six Eyes, Infinity, the title, the students, the responsibilities, who is Satoru Gojo? And I think that's the ironic part. The world never really allowed Gojo to be anything except the strongest. Everyone needed Gojo, but almost nobody needed Satoru. He was surrounded by people but still alone. Infinity is the most perfect visual metaphor for him. The closer the people get, the farther away they become. Nobody can touch him, nobody can stand beside him. And after Geto left him, that wasn't just his technique anymore. It became his life. And to be honest, once I understood about his isolation and the infinity metaphor and the ghetto loss, it changed the way how I saw every scene with Gojo. Every time he smiles, every joke, every time he acted like nothing bothers him, it all looks slightly different. So there's one question that is in my mind: when Gojo died, what will happen next? If Gojo spent his life trying to create people who could stand beside him, who actually inherited his title when he died? Yuta is the obvious answer. Gojo believed he could stand beside him, but Yuta never gets to simply replace Gojo. In our perspective, Yuta has to keep fighting in a world that has just lost its strongest teacher. And then there is Yuji Itadori. Yuji never chose his life. Kenjaku shaped the circumstances of his birth and Sukuna pulled him into Jujutsu. But Yuji is still kind and warm and human. And he is one of the few people who sees Gojo as a teacher, not just as a weapon or a symbol. But after Gojo's death, the part of that burden lands on Yuji. The person Gojo wanted to protect from his world becomes the person forced to carry it. And another character which is very hard to explain is Megumi Fushiguro. Gojo saw something in him. Maybe another kid trapped in the same broken system that took away Geto from him. Gojo believed Megumi had the potential to surpass him, but that potential means nothing if the story doesn't let it bloom. The next generation was supposed to inherit the world Gojo built. Instead, they inherited the battlefield. This isn't just about Gojo. This is about what happens when a story builds everything around one pillar and then removes it without building anything else to hold the weight. For example, when Jiraiya dies, Naruto inherits his philosophy. When Rengoku dies, Tanjiro inherits his fire. Their death hurts, but their students become the living proof that their mentor's life matters, and the story does a very good job that doesn't feel like they are lost or their ideology is lost. But it's a very different thing with Satoru Gojo. Gojo's tragedy feels different because I think his student didn't inherit his dream, they just inherited his battlefield. And this is why the fandom reacted the way they did. There's a difference between a death that hurts and death that feels unfinished. Gojo's death hurts, yes, but when the story doesn't immediately show you what that death builds, that grief has nowhere to go. And this is why Airport scene divides people emotionally. It gives Gojo a beautiful goodbye. He is reunited with his old friend. He says he fought with everything he had, and the only regret he names is that Geto was not there to see him off. Through Nanami, we hear Meme's idea of heading to North to become someone new or South to return to your old self. I think it was just beautifully written. But structurally, it leaves us with the same question: what was Gojo's death supposed to create? And maybe the strangest thing was what fans did next. We kept trying to bring Gojo back. When Yuta body swap happened, there was like many fan theories, fan arts. There were even theories about Gojo returning as a kid in Modlo. To be honest, I believed that for one full day and before some short person told me it was fan made. Every possibility became a reason to believe he might return. Because we weren't ready to lose him, and maybe the story hadn't made us ready for it. If you enjoy this kind of thoughtful reflection, consider subscribing, but don't leave yet because this is where it all comes together. Remember when I told you about my cousin? We were having a completely different conversation back then. I had just watched Gojo fight Toji and she was talking about JJK having too many characters dying. I thought she was talking about the same thing that I just watched. So I told her, don't worry, he'll come back, Gojo will come back. But she wasn't talking about Toji. She was talking about the real one. And that's the strange part. From the very bottom of my heart, I thought Gojo will come back because in JJK, Gojo was the person who's supposed to come back when everything went wrong. Until one day, he didn't. I wonder if she still thinks Gojo would come back because when I told her, she was actually convinced. So, Gojo spent years trying to create a future that could exist without him. So, when he finally dies, the story has to show us that future. And JJK does show his student moving forward, but it never made that handoff feels as emotionally complete as I wanted. And maybe that's why Geto matters so much to the ending. Geto was the person who knew Gojo before he became a symbol. He was the one person who could look at Satoru and see the person underneath the strongest, and he was gone long before Gojo was. So, what did Gojo actually wants? I don't think he wanted to create another Gojo. I think he wanted to create a world where nobody had to become one. He wanted students who could stand beside him, not behind him. Gojo spent his life being untouchable, and in the end, story couldn't touch him what he meant either. And maybe that's why we are still talking about him. Not because we miss a powerful character, because we miss a version of Jujutsu Kaisen that his death was supposed to create.